French investigators face an unprecedented challenge.
I'll tell you everything I can.
The world's fastest passenger plane has crashed on takeoff.
They knew that they were going to die.
No time!
When one faltered and fell to the ground, it shook the world.
What could have caused the first fatal crash of Concorde?
Looks like they were bleeding fuel.
The search for an answer uncovers 3 critical clues: a ruptured tire, a shattered fuel tank, and a mysterious strip of metal.
It didn't look like anything that came from an aircraft.
But can investigators complete the puzzle?
Nous n'avions pas le lien qui pouvait...
We just couldn't tie it all together.
The evidence was not talking to us.
Charles de Gaulle Airport, Paris. One of the busiest airports in Europe, and the only place in France to catch sight of the world's most prestigious passenger plane, Concorde.
It's really a wonderful machine. It's been described as a beautiful white bird. It's been described as the white rocket. It's fantastic.
Concorde flying was a real show. I mean, everybody was watching, so it was spectacular. It was noisy, and it was like going at an air show.
Concorde is a technological marvel. The world's only supersonic airliner, it can fly at more than twice the speed of sound, at altitudes that brush the edge of space.
We talk about flying above 55,000 feet into a deep, deep blue sky. It's a very, very special aircraft.
It takes an exceptional crew to fly this remarkable plane.
Air France 4590. Do you want Whiskey 10 or Romeo?
I need all the runway, eh?
Okay, taxi for Romeo. Air France 4590.
Today, Captain Christian Marty will be flying the Concorde.
Clear on the right. On the right is clear.
First Officer Jean Marcot will monitor the instruments.
Nose droop at 5.
The crew lowers the plane's sleek aerodynamic nose for taxi. Though crucial for supersonic flight, the long beak makes it difficult for the crew to see where they're going on the ground.
I'll get a bit of speed before it swings the brakes.
With more than 23,000 flight hours between them, Captain Marty and First Officer Marcot are among the world's most elite pilots. Jean-Louis Chatelain was also a member of that exclusive club.
Many pilots all over the world would have loved to fly the Concorde. But there were only a few of them, and we were only a few, happy few to be elected on flying the Concorde.
The jet's maiden flight was made in 1969, the result of a historic aviation partnership between Britain and France. A unique delta wing gives Concorde its signature look, while helping to reduce drag at supersonic speeds. But the design exacts a high cost at low speeds, making it harder for Concorde to gain the lift necessary to get off the ground.
Delta wing is built with tremendous drag on the wing, so you have to counter the drag with a pretty high level of thrust.
How much fuel have we used?
Flight engineer Gilles Jardineau keeps a vigilant eye on fuel consumption.
We've got 800 kilos.
Concorde burns through it at an astonishing rate. In the short taxi to the runway, the plane's 4 engines have already used as much fuel as the average car uses in 6 months. Booking a seat on the famed jet requires deep pockets. The return fare to New York costs more than $9,000.
It was not something unaffordable for those people we had on board. Some of them, I tell you, they didn't even know how much they were paying.
Air France 4590, runway 26 right, clear for takeoff.
4590, cleared for takeoff. 26 right.
The tower controller today is Gilles Logelin.
I was stationed in the southern control tower, which has a very good view over the two runways that we use. This day was the same as usual. I gave him the takeoff clearance.
Everybody ready?
Yes.
Concorde's takeoff speed is 198 knots, 40 knots faster than a 747. The plane's 4 afterburners ignite, giving the engines the boost they need to achieve that incredible speed.
As it passes you, you feel it and you hear it because it is loud and strong, and it's just a beautiful sight to the spectator and the aviator.
V1.
The first officer tells the captain they've reached V1, or decision speed. They're now going too quickly to abort the takeoff.
You cannot stop anymore. You have to go on. You have to continue takeoff, whatever happens.
Watch out!
Suddenly, the plane begins veering left.
Stop!
The flight engineer urges the captain to abort the takeoff, but it's too late to stop. Captain Marty lifts the supersonic jet into the air. Gilles Logelin realizes he's now watching a disaster.
It was a very unexpected situation to see flames on an aircraft that is departing on the runway. You don't have time to lose, so immediately I've pushed the red button, which is a button for alert.
4590, you have flames behind you.
Roger!
The plane is engulfed in flames.
Failure! Engine 2!
Engine fire procedure.
Captain Marty struggles for control as the engineer shuts down the burning engine and activates a fire extinguisher.
What's the airspeed?
The plane's airspeed is now dangerously low.
The airspeed, the airspeed.
Something is happening. Some things that is not covered by training. Something that in pilot career you don't want to face.
Logelin scrambles to clear other planes from Concorde's path.
I wanted to clear the traffic to let him any option possible.
First Officer Marco wants to head for a nearby airport.
Le Bourget! Le Bourget!
But the crew can't outfly the fire that is rapidly consuming their plane. Shocking images of the unfolding disaster are captured by amateur video. In the cabin, panic and terror.
No time!
The supersonic marvel of modern aviation.
No!
Slams into an airport hotel.
Oh mon Dieu.
I could see kind of big, like a big mushroom of smoke. I think until the very last moments where I was thinking that something will save the situation. I remember that I just sat down on the carpet floor of the control tower up there and I cried.
All 109 passengers and crew on board Concorde are dead. 4 more people have been killed on the ground.
How can I say more on this? We were totally shocked. That's it. That's it.
It had been such a special thing in the place of aviation that when one faltered and fell to the ground, it shook the world. It really did.
Until today, Concorde had a remarkable safety record. 31 years of supersonic flight and not a single fatal crash.
This plane was simply magnificent, and it was a shock for everyone.
Alain Bouillard will lead the crash investigation. He takes on a challenge no investigator before him has faced, figuring out what happened to the technological wonder that had seemed immune to disaster. On the outskirts of Paris, the fuel-laden Concorde has ignited an inferno. Investigators are anxious to search the wreckage for clues, but first, firefighters must put out the catastrophic fire.
The problem was the intense heat at the crash site, which made it impossible for the rescue services to recover the flight recorders.
Knowing the eyes of the world are watching, Bouillard and his team press ahead with the investigation. They speak to as many witnesses as possible.
I'll tell you everything I can.
Few saw more than controller Gilles Logelin.
After an accident, you remember every single second of the process.
I saw the flames just before they took off.
Logelin tells them he saw intense flames shooting from the plane's left side before it lifted off. Other witnesses report hearing the sound of an explosion while Concorde was speeding down the runway. Less than 90 seconds later, the plane fell from the sky. All Bouillard knows for sure is that something caused the fire while Concorde was still on the ground.
We became interested in the runway because the event happened during the acceleration for takeoff.
Bouillard immediately dispatches a team to the runway to search for clues.
Looks like they were bleeding fuel.
Concorde has left a trail of burnt and blackened jet fuel along the runway. There's also some scattered debris, vital clues that fell from the plane at the very start of the crisis.
First of all, it was obvious that there were traces of fire that were still visible on the runway, as well as traces of fuel and many airplane parts. So we had to collect all these parts to preserve them for the investigation.
Meanwhile, in a hangar near the airport, investigators sort through scorched wreckage from the crash site. The plane's 2 black boxes have been recovered from the burned and twisted debris. But it's too soon to say if the data on the recorders has survived the fire.
There was a huge amount of fuel on board, so the boxes were exposed to intense flames, which is the worst possible thing for flight recorders.
Concorde's black boxes are designed to withstand only 30 minutes of intense heat. Investigators rush them to the lab and hope for the best.
Pieces of tire.
The runway search has turned up a baffling assortment of debris, including a twisted metal strip that no one can identify.
What do we make of this?
We were dealing with a very complicated plane that had been completely destroyed by fire. There were very few pieces left.
Well, I know this is a piece of the fuel tank.
Among the first pieces recovered from the site was a part that was quickly identified as being from one of the fuel tanks.
Concorde has 13 fuel tanks, 1 in the tail section, and 12 more that combine to fill almost the entire delta wing. Finding a fragment of a fuel tank on the runway is an important clue.
B1.
It means at least one of the plane's 13 tanks ruptured during takeoff. VR studies video of Concorde's last moments shot by a passing truck driver.
Must have been a massive fuel leak. It's the only way to explain a fire like that.
The long plume of flames confirms a large leak from the fuel tank is the likely source of the fire.
L'ampleur de cette fuite,
the scale of the leak, mixed with the surrounding air, is an extremely volatile mix, extremely flammable.
But VR still has no idea what could have caused such a massive leak. Fortunately, technicians have managed to salvage the cockpit voice recording.
Okay, let's get going.
VR hopes the pilot's conversation in the cockpit will shed some light on the puzzling collection of leads.
Everybody ready? Yes.
Everything seems normal as the pilots prepare for takeoff.
4 green. B1.
But just before liftoff, there's a loud noise.
Watch out!
That sounded like some kind of explosion. Please go back again.
Watch out! Stop!
4590, you have flames behind you.
Roger! Failure! Engine 2!
L'enregistreur de conversation de cockpit.
The cockpit voice recorder showed the crew only became aware of the fire at the rear of the aircraft when the control tower warned them about it.
VR now knows the precise moment the deadly fire began, but he still doesn't know what caused it.
Well, I would love to get a look at that runway debris.
Because Concorde includes parts that are American-made, the National Transportation Safety Board sends Bob McIntosh to join the team.
It's unique that a French airplane on French soil would have a United States representative, but the aircraft was equipped with United States manufactured and designed tires.
Among the debris found on the runway, there are large torn pieces of aircraft tire, some weighing more than 9 pounds.
Looks like a blowout.
To support the huge weight of the plane and withstand the heat generated during takeoff, Concorde's tires are reinforced with a strong rubber belt and filled with high-pressure nitrogen.
Airplane tires in general certainly are different than those in an automobile. They have to withstand a tremendous amount of weight. These are heavy, heavy-duty tires.
When Concorde tires rupture, they can act like small bombs.
Maybe a piece of the tire flew up and burst the fuel tank here in the wing.
Watch out!
The force with which a tire might explode is not simply going to be a blowout. There's a whole lot of structure and rubber belt around the tire that's probably going to separate, and that's, of course, a potential for damage.
A look at Concorde's history turns up 6 incidents of a tire rupturing and damaging a fuel tank.
We uncovered many incidents where tires were punctured or destroyed, and in some cases, the rims as well.
The most serious incident was in 1979, when a ruptured tire damaged a fuel tank so severely that the crew was forced to land shortly after takeoff. To prevent a recurrence, authorities mandated that Concorde tires be replaced much more frequently. So what could have caused a relatively new tire to rupture on takeoff? Investigators take a closer look at the metal debris found on the runway.
Maybe something cut into the tire. Something like this.
The shape of the metal strip that we found was exactly the same shape as the tire debris.
There were a lot of theories flying around in the first 2 or 3 days as to cause and effect of the tire, of the metal strip, and of the fuel that was liberated from the left side of the airplane.
I want to know what this is and where it came from. Oh, and find out how much a fully loaded Concorde weighs. There's something I want to try.
This was the scene after July's Concorde crash near Paris.
News of the downed Concorde has stunned travelers and aviation insiders around the world. The French Transportation Ministry grounds the nation's entire fleet. British Airways soon follows suit.
In London on Friday, British Airways' fleet of Concordes remained grounded, and depending on the investigation's findings, they may never fly again.
That was a major blow, particularly to the UK operator, British Airways. Air France had expected it, I think, all along.
Whether the pride of French and British aviation will ever fly again now depends entirely on what Bouillard and his team can uncover.
There was lots of media pressure because it was a famous plane. It was the only supersonic aircraft, and it was the Concorde's first fatal accident.
Facing enormous pressure, they focus on the mysterious strip of metal found near the top of the runway.
It didn't look like anything that came from an aircraft to me. It was bent in such a shape that it was really strange, and we were all wondering if it was something that perhaps had fallen off a runway sweeper, or if it had fallen out of a construction truck, a baggage cart that was being towed around the airport someplace.
But evidence soon points them in a different direction. Metallurgical tests reveal the strip is made of lightweight titanium, a metal frequently used in aircraft parts.
It also had a number of rivets on its surface, and this made us think it was used in aviation.
A reddish-orange substance on one side also points to the possibility the part may have fallen off an airplane. Lab tests reveal it's a kind of adhesive, often used in aviation repairs.
The matching of the debris on the runway with the damages that were observed in the takeoff run was something that required a lot of analysis.
Somehow, a piece of metal from an aircraft became a deadly hazard on the runway.
Next, please.
Investigators need to know which plane it came from and how it ended up there.
Next.
There was a tremendous amount of pressure in the BEA.
Next. Next. Next.
To get to the bottom of where that strip had come from.
It's pretty clear this isn't from the Concorde. We need to come at this from another way.
I spent more than 2 weeks at the scene of the investigation, and we still didn't know where it had come from.
Painstaking research rules out the possibility that the metal strip fell from Concorde. But there are dozens of other planes to consider. Bouillard needs to narrow down the search.
What I need is a list of every single plane that used the runway before the Concorde took off.
A busy international airport like Charles de Gaulle has hundreds of flights arriving and departing every day.
Metal parts are often found on the runway. Planes can lose small parts that are in need of repair, or sometimes inspection doors aren't closed properly, and they break away from the plane and fall on the runway.
But the airport's runways are inspected several times a day and cleared of debris.
Okay, it wasn't there in the morning. That leaves the planes that took off after 1300.
Nous avons recherché par élimination.
We searched by elimination. We knew that it was a strip of metal that didn't come from the Concorde. It didn't belong to any ground vehicles. So, we looked at the planes that had taken off before the Concorde.
Knowing the time of the last runway inspection allows Bouillard to narrow the search to just 2 types of planes.
That's more like it. That part is either from a 747 or a DC-10. Let's figure out which.
Investigators pore over schematics of the two planes, searching for the suspicious part.
This isn't it.
Finally, they spot something.
What is this?
The metal strip looks like it could have come from the engine of a DC-10. Something called a wear strip. The strips act as a buffer for moving parts inside the engine, but they're not essential for the safe operation of the plane.
Certainly, there was a great deal of anticipation. Could this be really from a DC-10, and could it be from the engine portion?
Investigators can't answer those questions soon enough, as the entire world waits to learn why commercial aviation's greatest achievement went down in flames. At Charles de Gaulle Airport, the Concorde investigation catches a lucky break. An investigator notices something odd on an engine of a DC-10 that flies regularly between Paris and the US. But he only sees the plane for a moment before it takes off.
He got a quick glimpse, but he had enough of a glimpse to say, I think there's something wrong there, and I see an anomaly that tells me maybe that strip came from there.
Flight records reveal that very DC-10 took off from runway 26 right just minutes before the doomed Concorde. Could it be the plane they're hunting for?
It's not quite the real thing, but it is the best we've got.
We didn't have the metal strip. It was still in the possession of the French gendarme.
Bouillard gives McIntosh a mock-up of the engine wear strip, hoping it will help determine whether it fell from the suspect DC-10.
We were all glued to the phone and trying to figure out when we could look at the aircraft, because by this time that particular aircraft had left Charles de Gaulle and was flying around in North America.
McIntosh soon tracks the DC-10 to Houston. He'll need to catch up with it there to get a close look at the engine.
It really became a challenge to me to find this aircraft and to find the specific point where this strip had come from.
If McIntosh can't track down the origin of the metal strip, the full story of the Concorde disaster may never be known. In Paris, Alain Bouillard finally has a working theory that may explain one of the most shocking aviation disasters the world has ever seen.
This'll do. Let's see if it can slice open a tire.
Incredibly, it all comes down to a thin strip of metal that may have fallen from a DC-10 onto runway 26 right.
V1.
Where it ruptured a massive Concorde tire.
Watch out! Stop!
That fatally bursts a fuel tank. It's time to test that theory.
The first thing we had to do was reproduce a tire rupture to try to explain the size of the fragments we found and to see if it was possible for this metal strip to cause the type of damage we saw in the debris.
They create an exact replica of the metal strip that was found on the runway and place it under a brand new Concorde tire. A two-wheel trailer is stacked with heavy blocks to recreate the load on Concorde's tires. 25 tons. They need to know if driving over the narrow strip of metal is enough to rip open a rugged Concorde tire. In dramatic fashion, they get their answer.
Amazing. You can't ask for better proof than that.
That was fantastic. C'était parfait.
This plane is tough on tires, and it seems fuel tanks.
Bouillard is convinced he's cracked the case. Hoping to confirm his theory, investigators study the fragments of the Concorde's fuel tank. But there's a problem. If a piece of flying debris ruptured the tank should be bent from the outside in. But the tank fragment from the runway is bent in the opposite way. It looks like Bouillard's theory is falling apart.
I don't get it. I just don't get it. If the tire didn't rupture the fuel tank, then what did?
The entire investigation is back at square one.
We had all these elements, but we had trouble making the connection between the tire fragments, the strip of metal, and the pieces of the fuel tank. All these remained isolated elements, and we couldn't find a way to link them together.
What are we missing? I have never seen anything like this.
The action that would make this piece of fuel tank escape was unique.
Bouillard is facing an unprecedented mystery. What punctured the Concorde's fuel tank from the inside? If he fails to solve the mystery, the loss of 113 lives may never be explained. The baffling evidence from the Concorde's ruptured fuel tank remains a puzzling dilemma, one that threatens to derail the entire investigation.
Pretty heavy load of fuel.
On the day of the crash, all 12 fuel tanks inside Concorde's enormous delta wing had been completely filled.
For routes like Paris to New York, the Concorde's fuel tanks needed to be filled to their maximum capacity. Without full tanks, it wouldn't have the reserves needed to cross the Atlantic.
The only thing in the fuel tank is the fuel. Maybe what burst the tank is the fuel itself.
The heavy fuel load suggests an unconventional theory. When a high-speed projectile hits a container full of liquid, it can set off a tsunami-like wave powerful enough to rupture the container at a different point from where it was struck.
The liquid will move around and push evenly on every part of the tank. And it's the weakest part of the tank that will tend to rupture.
Set it so the fuel tanks are completely full.
He hopes a computer simulation will show if that's what happened here.
And the piece of tire is 5 kilograms.
The scenario that we had in mind was only possible if the tanks were full.
Okay, let's watch what happens.
Bouillard knows his theory may meet resistance. There's no record of an aircraft fuel tank ever rupturing this way before.
Fire.
The simulation recreates the effect of a piece of tire hitting the fuel tank. For Bouillard, it's the moment of truth.
Let's try it again. Only this time, aim over to the left. Maybe we'll find a weak spot.
Conditions have to be just right.
Fire!
But when they are...
We've got it. Well done.
Firing a piece of tire at the tank can make it burst from the inside out.
We were convinced this was what happened.
It was a revelation to all of us, and indeed a very plausible explanation as to how the major fuel liberation took place.
Finding the source of the deadly metal strip is more important than ever. In Houston, Bob McIntosh prepares to inspect the DC-10 that took off 5 minutes before Concorde.
We were met by the safety manager of Continental Airlines. We all realized that we had a pretty serious duty here, and there might be some real repercussions coming from this, what we were about to do.
McIntosh immediately spots something out of the ordinary. There's an odd gap in the wear strips on the DC-10's engine.
Give me a closer look at that, will you?
We had the mechanics open up the cowling and expose the area where the strip was missing.
The gap seems to have traces of the same reddish-orange glue that was on the metal piece from France, but McIntosh needs to be sure.
It obviously didn't fit right, and there was an attempt to make it fit better by using this mastic or glue material.
Okay, let's see if the lab can match that.
There also seemed to be some extra rivet holes on the engine. He checks carefully to see if they match the ones punched into the strip found on the Paris runway.
We have a winner.
It's a perfect match.
We found the culprit. There was no doubt in our minds that the strip had come from this aircraft. So there were some different emotions there at that moment.
Macintosh needs to know how an engine part could have fallen off a plane from a major US airline, causing a fatal tragedy. He combs through the DC-10's maintenance records and learns the wear strip was replaced just a couple of weeks before the accident. The holes drilled into the strip didn't line up properly with the holes on the engine cowling, so the mechanic drilled new ones. Then he added some adhesive to fix it in place. Lab tests confirm the adhesive used on the DC-10 is identical to that found on the debris from the runway at Charles de Gaulle.
There was no intent to violate a regulation. It was just the job wasn't done to a professional level that you would expect from a first-line airline in particular.
The piece stayed in place for just 16 days before dropping onto the Paris runway 5 minutes before Concorde took off. Weir has one final question.
Here's your time!
Why didn't the pilots abort the takeoff and save the lives of everyone on board?
No!
Technicians have managed to piece together the data from the burnt and damaged flight recorder.
Everybody ready? Yes.
Engines are fine, speed increasing.
Together with the cockpit voice recorder, it paints a vivid picture of a sudden emergency that escalates rapidly.
Four green.
The plane is rocketing down the 2.5-mile runway
V1
at nearly 200 miles an hour.
Watch out!
When the fuel ignites, the massive jet needs more than a mile to stop. But there's only 1,000 yards of runway left. The pilots must put the burning plane in the air.
Aborting the takeoff at 180 knots would also have led to the total destruction of the aircraft.
2 of Concorde's 4 engines are on fire.
We lost engine 1 and 2 at almost the same time.
The crew found themselves confronted with a plane that had lost half its thrust.
With only 2 engines working, the plane won't climb.
What's the airspeed? The airspeed.
It's totally surprised by what's happening. All this happened in something like 3 seconds of time, which is really a short time.
We all know the importance of speed for delta wing planes, and so the aircraft found itself in a very difficult position.
The crew tries to raise the landing gear to reduce drag.
The gears, y'all! I'm trying!
Due to the damage, the gear won't retract.
La rupture du pneumatique a produit
When the tire burst, it damaged the sensors on the landing gear doors. With those doors in the wrong position, the gear could not retract.
The data shows the crew fought hard to keep the plane flying right up to the very end. But the fire is consuming their wing.
At one point, they knew that they were going to die. No panic at all to the very end. To the very end, they have tried to find a solution.
Investigators estimate the raging inferno burned at more than 2,000 degrees, hot enough to melt the wing.
There was nothing they could do.
Nous sommes convaincus que
we were convinced that from the moment the plane rolled over the metal strip, a catastrophe was inevitable.
The accident report makes a number of recommendations to make Concorde safer. Engineers design stronger tires that can better withstand the plane's high speed and immense weight. Fuel tanks are reinforced with Kevlar to prevent leaks. Airport authorities also implement a better system for monitoring runways and removing debris.
What is puzzling is that you have a 200 grams piece of metal on the runway. It turns out to trigger one of the most catastrophic crashes in aviation history.
A year after the crash that took 113 lives, an official memorial service is held.
I was with them, so in a way I'm kind of linked with this crash. It will remain the experience of my life. I would have given everything not to be there this day, but I'm the one.
15 months after the crash, the Concorde fleet is finally back in the air. Soon after, Alain Bouillard seizes an opportunity to take a flight in the aircraft he helped save.
I had the opportunity to fly as a passenger on the Concorde. I distinctly remember the color of the sky at 60,000 feet and the sensation of acceleration and speed. These are sensations that are very particular, unique, that I haven't felt since and that I may never feel again.
The return of the world's only supersonic plane doesn't last long. 2 years later, with rising fuel costs and falling profits, Air France and British Airways decide to retire Concorde forever. It makes its last flight on November the 26th, 2003.
For the first time in aviation history, it was kind of a step back. I mean, we had supersonic transportation. We have not that anymore.
And it was a sad day when we saw the retirement of the aircraft. On the other hand, recognizing that it was 1965 technology, it probably was time to retire the aircraft and go on to other more modern things.